I have two questions for Dr. Green, and I guess anyone else, having to do with faith and education. So you had mentioned prayers in schools, and so in the Muslim faith, we pray 5 times a day, and that often includes praying during school hours. And you'll have students asking for accommodation. Now, there's been opposition within the public sphere of having a religious activity in a publicly funded space, and religious activity in which there is gender segregation, a religious activity in which only a male can address the congregation. So I'd just like your thoughts on that and how to address this. What I see will be an impending conflict, if not already. The second is public Catholic schools in Ontario. That's, of course, a result of Confederation. And with the changing population, do you foresee Catholic-funded schools going by the wayside, similarly to like Newfoundland, when confessional schools have really, disappeared from the public landscape? So.
Thank you. So I think that a point Andrew made earlier is really relevant to this, which is that we don't have, I'm a permanent resident, I'm not a citizen, so can I say we? We don't have in Canada this constitutional separation of church and state. So the idea that a public school is a place where religious activities can't take place is a problem constitutionally. One of the things I want to speak to from the perspective of research that I actually carried out in the United Kingdom rather than in Canada, but around this question of dealing with requests in secular public school settings. Well, actually, it cropped up in religious schools as well, because many of the public sector, the public provision of schooling and education is delivered by the church. So you have quite a number of Church of England schools in the UK with predominantly majority Muslim pupil population. So that question of how you practice prayer with a whole different set of assumptions around gender and authority and the nature of authority for the Muslim community, it understood in different ways from the way it is within the Anglican Church. All of that kind of bubbled up from time to time. And what we kept coming across in our research was were school administrators and teachers who were utterly ill-equipped to deal with the conversation. So they were terrified of making decisions either way, of saying, no, we're a Church of England school, and that's part of our distinctive, institutional identity, and that means no, or that means yes, which kind of roots to the point I was making about regulating for sameness, because the easy thing to do in that situation is just to say no prayer or no religious accommodations. And we have to do better than that. I have a problem with the segregation of prayer on the basis of gender as a woman, but I'm going to echo what Michael said earlier, that I will defend somebody else's right to say that's part of our practice of prayer. What I'm worried about are the teachers that we are turning out of our teacher training institutions in Ontario, in across Canada and in the UK, who have no framework for being able to talk about this well as part of their professional identity. And that lands us in that gets us to extremes really, really quickly in these conversations. As regards the situation in Ontario, I haven't got a crystal ball. I was kind of hiding behind that. I don't know how it's going to play out. But I do want to say, again, there is, these decisions haven't happened ahistorically. They are part of how public education was constituted at Confederation. So to take that right away is a constitutional issue. And I would rather multiply the right. I would rather say let's have greater diversity across the sector as a whole than reduce the number of people who have access to it. Am I allowed to sneak in another point here or not?
You asked what I said.
Only because I was sitting here thinking about, trying to anticipate how, another point on which somebody, you could challenge me, this sort of sense of, well, okay, Beth, you're saying that we need to do better at talking to one another. Well, if we all go to our own religious schools and stay in our own religious silos, how do we ever meet one another? Which is another objection you get to religious schools a lot. And again, I want to talk about the research that's around it, because the kind of theoretical name for that is the social contact theory. The idea that by putting people together, by putting children together from different communities and faiths in one school, they will just naturally meet one another, know one another, and be good citizens. And the example that's always pointed to in this instance is Northern Ireland and the segregation in Northern Ireland between Protestant and Catholic schools. But my friend's dad was the principal of the first integrated school in Northern Ireland, and the approach they took there was to suck out, to just create a place where again there was an ahistorical vacuum, and you just teach all the children as if they're the same. And he talked about how devastating that was for their own identity, their own understanding. That they couldn't understand one another, and the teachers couldn't help them to understand one another, because there was just this sameness, there was this vacuum, there was this place where you couldn't speak about what it means to have suffered under Protestant British rule, or to have, it's so, and a lot of the work says that just throwing people together in the mix and assuming that they're all the same and that we all experience the same values, that it actually doesn't work. As a pedagogic process, it has failed in terms of, you need to do, as our rabbi was giving examples from his context, you actually have to give young people a knowledge of their own tradition, you have to give them a framework, and they have to be able to learn to practice their faith and do that well in their own community and meet others. And so I'm not saying that it is the responsibility of the religious school to remain in the silo, but I am saying that the answer isn't just to just throw everybody into a public school and take religion out.